The headlights sliced through the California night like two fragile promises. A white 2003 Toyota Highlander rolled along a lonely stretch of road near Castaic Lake, its driver wide awake yet eerily calm. Inside sat 20-year-old Bryce Laspisa, red-haired, blue-eyed, and silent, staring into the darkness as if the night was whispering something only he could hear. Hours later, that same car would be found wrecked and abandoned at the bottom of a steep embankment. The driver's seat empty, the door open, no blood, no body, only Bryce's wallet, phone, and laptop, untouched, waiting. And just like that, truth faded into shadows. Bryce Laspisa wasn't the kind of kid you'd expect to vanish. He was bright, artistic, friendly, the kind of person who made people feel lighter. Born on April 30th, 1994, in Springfield, Illinois, he was the only child of Michael and Karen Laspisa. The family later moved to Laguna Niguel, California, a peaceful coastal town that seemed like the perfect place to raise a son. After graduating from high school in 2012, Bryce enrolled at Sierra College near Sacramento, majoring in graphic and industrial design. His friends described him as funny, generous, and always up for an adventure. He had a girlfriend, Kim Sly, and seemed to be carving a promising path for himself. But sometimes, darkness doesn't announce its arrival. It seeps in quietly, through long nights, quiet doubts, and subtle changes that no one sees until it's too late. The fall semester of 2013 had just begun when people started noticing Bryce wasn't himself. His close friends said he'd become distant. He stopped going to classes. His art projects, once full of color and imagination, sat unfinished. His girlfriend noticed the change first. Bryce was drinking heavily, staying up late, and relying on a prescription medication called Vyvanse, meant to help focus but dangerous when abused. When she confronted him, he brushed it off. "I'm fine," he'd say, with a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But he wasn't fine. In late August, just days into the semester, Bryce's behavior grew more erratic. He gave away his Xbox and some of his belongings, telling friends they'd mean more to them. He sent strange text messages, brief, cryptic, like goodbye notes disguised as casual updates. His roommate, Sean Dixon, grew concerned and called Bryce's parents. It was August 28, 2013. "Something's off," Sean told them. "You might want to check on him." That night, Bryce called home. He sounded calm, too calm. He told his mother he loved her, but there was a strange finality in his tone, something she couldn't shake off after hanging up. The next day, August 29th, Karen and Michael received another call, this time from Kim, his girlfriend. She said Bryce had driven to her house late that night, but wouldn't let her in on what was going on. He wanted to talk, then changed his mind. When she tried to stop him for driving home, he insisted he needed space. Kim took his car keys, worried he wasn't in the right state of mind. But when she called Bryce's mother, Karen told her to return them, thinking he just needed rest. It was a decision she would replay in her mind for years. Bryce left Kim's apartment just before midnight on August 29th. He told her he was driving back to his college apartment near Rockland, but he never went there. Instead, his car headed south, away from school, away from everything familiar, toward the Los Angeles area, where his parents lived. For the next 24 hours, Bryce's movements would make less and less sense. Phone records and gas receipts later pieced together a bizarre timeline. He stopped in Buttonwillow, a small town off Interstate 5, about 3 hours north of his parents' home. There, he called his mother at 2 a.m., saying he'd pulled over to rest. She assumed he'd continue driving in the morning. But morning came, and Bryce was still there. A local man named Christian, who worked at a roadside service station, noticed the young man sitting alone in his car and offered help. Bryce said he was fine, just tired. But when Christian checked again hours later, the car hadn't moved. Bryce had been sitting there for nearly 9 hours, doing nothing. Christian called Bryce's mother, explaining what he saw. Concerned, she spoke to her son directly. Bryce told her not to worry. "I'll be home soon," he said. His voice was calm, flat, rehearsed. By 3 p.m., Christian checked one last time, and Bryce was still in the same spot. That's when Karen asked Christian to make sure Bryce was okay face to face. He did. Bryce even smiled, said he was getting back on the road now. He bought a drink, thanked the man, and drove off. It seemed like everything would finally be okay, but it wasn't. At 11 p.m. that same night, August 30th, Bryce called his mother again. He said he was on the way home and would arrive around 3 a.m. For hours later, the doorbell never rang. When his parents woke up, there was no Bryce. No call, no message, only silence. At 8 a.m., police knocked on the Laspisa's door. They had found Bryce's car, flipped over an embankment near Castaic Lake, about 2 hours north of Los Angeles. The scene looked grim but puzzling. The back window was smashed from the inside. His laptop, wallet, and phone were neatly placed inside the car. The driver's seat was empty. Footprints led to the edge of a nearby lake, then stopped. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no crash injuries. It looked as if Bryce had walked away willingly into nowhere. That's where truth stopped and shadows took over. People would search the lake for days. Divers combed the water. Helicopters scanned the hills. Police dogs followed faint trails that ended abruptly, as if Bryce had simply dissolved into thin air. But the strangest detail was the time gap. Investigators discovered the crash had likely occurred just minutes after Bryce hung up with his mother. If he'd been driving south, the road near Castaic made sense. But what didn't make sense was why he accelerated towards a steep drop in the dark and survived. The car rolled. Bryce got out, and from there, the story ends in fragments. The discovery of Bryce's car set off a search that would consume the next several days and haunt his parents for years to come. Police combed through the crash site near Castaic Lake, trying to piece together what had happened. The embankment was steep, but not lethal, and investigators quickly realized Bryce had likely survived. His blood was found inside the car, a small amount on the headrest, but not nearly enough to suggest serious injury. The back window had been kicked out from the inside, a sign of escape rather than accident. But escape from what? Detectives scoured the area on foot. Search and rescue teams spread through the hills, calling his name through bullhorns. Helicopters circled the lake. Dogs tracked his scent for nearly a mile toward a nearby truck stop before it vanished. It was as if Bryce had stepped off the edge of the world. For Michael and Karen Laspisa, the days blurred together. They stayed near the lake, holding on to the belief that their son was alive and disoriented somewhere nearby. Every phone buzz, every shadow on the horizon made their hearts race. But as hours turned into days, that fragile hope began to fracture. Detectives gathered every clue they could. Phone records showed Bryce's last call to his mother came around 2:08 a.m., moments before the crash. GPS data from his car placed him circling the same area, over and over, for almost 2 hours before driving off a cliff. No one knew why. The car wasn't out of gas. His phone was working. His parents were expecting him home. But something in Bryce's mind seemed to be unraveling in real time. When officers searched his digital footprint, they found no suicide note, no message to friends, no sign of premeditation. His laptop showed no alarming searches. His texts were routine, if not a little cold. It wasn't a clean break. It was a collapse. Police called it a voluntary disappearance. His parents called it impossible. For weeks, search teams scoured the rugged terrain around Castaic Lake. Volunteers handed out flyers. Fishermen scanned the shoreline for clues. Helicopters equipped with infrared searched at night, but nothing appeared. Not a piece of clothing, not a shoe, not a trace. The lake was dredged twice. Still nothing. Every day, the story grew colder. Bryce's friends and family replayed the days before his disappearance like scenes in a movie. Every message, every word, every look suddenly seemed heavier. They remembered the exhaustion in his eyes, the strange goodbyes, the way he'd given away personal belongings like he knew he wouldn't need them anymore. Some said he was depressed. Others said it was the drugs, the Vivants mixed with alcohol. His parents wondered if it was something deeper, an identity crisis, a breakdown, something quietly consuming him from the inside. Whatever it was, it left no trace except silence. Over time, 3 main theories emerged, each darker than the last. The first was the simplest: suicide. Investigators believed Bryce might have intentionally driven off the embankment to end his life. But that theory unraveled quickly. There was no body, no evidence, and no signs of fatal impact. The drop wasn't high enough to guarantee death. and no physical remains were ever found. If he wanted to end his life, it didn't work. If he didn't, then what was he running from? The second theory was voluntary disappearance. Some thought Bryce had chosen to start over, maybe out of guilt, fear, or confusion. But abandoning your entire identity in the digital age is nearly impossible. His social security number was never used again. No bank withdrawals, no calls, no sightings. Still, some believe he might have survived that night and chosen to live off the grid, walking into a new life, leaving everything behind. The third theory, the one that still keeps people awake, is that someone else was involved. The castaic area is known for remote stretches and isolated roads. If Bryce wandered from the crash site, could he have encountered someone dangerous? Could a crime of opportunity have erased him completely? There were reports of hikers hearing screams near the lake days after the crash. Others claimed they saw a red-haired man walking along the interstate. None of the leads ever led anywhere solid. And so, the mystery remains, a story that feels complete but isn't, a picture with the last piece missing. Bryce's parents refused to give up. Year after year, they returned to Castaic Lake on the anniversary of his disappearance. They left flowers, candles, prayers, symbols of hope for a boy who had simply vanished. In interviews, they described Bryce as kind, intelligent, and full of potential, someone who loved art, who laughed easily, who had everything to live for. But even love can't always reach the places where the mind hides. What happened to Bryce Laspisa on that August night remains one of California's most haunting modern mysteries. He wasn't the first young man to drive into the dark and disappear, but his case carries a certain weight. It forces us to look inward, to question how well we really know the people we love, and how thin the line can be between confusion and crisis. Some mysteries fade with time, others linger, alive in the spaces between memory and speculation. Bryce's story lingers because it feels possible. It could be anyone's child, anyone's friend, anyone who smiled one day, said, "I'm fine," and was gone the next. His parents still hold out hope, a decade later, that their son is alive somewhere. They run a Facebook page, Find Bryce Laspisa, where strangers post prayers, theories, and occasional sightings that almost always end in heartbreak. Yet through all the uncertainty, one thing remains clear. Bryce's story isn't just about disappearance. It's about the quiet unraveling that happens in the shadows. The things people don't say, the feelings they hide, the truths that fade long before anyone notices. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Because sometimes, the scariest mysteries aren't the ones that happen in the dark. They're the ones that begin in daylight, when someone you love looks you in the eye and says they're okay. When truth fades into shadows, all that's left are the questions. Where's Bryce going that night? What was he running from? And if he's still out there, does he remember who he used to be?